All right, take it away.
Hello everyone. My name is Andre-Lira, and unfortunately, I'm just one person and not a creative studio, so temper your expectations with this talk. I'm going to be talking about how I built this installation here in front of you, which is called Hovercraft. It is my master's thesis for NYU's ITP program. If you know ITP, give me a signal. There we go. All right, let's get into it. So just a little brief bit about my background. I mainly, in the past 15, 20 years or so, I've been making music under the artist alias Dr. Jeep. I make electronic dance music. And for the past 10 years, from 2012 to 2023, I was working full-time as a senior producer, like project manager at a bunch of music and audio creative agencies. And at some point towards the end of that, I was getting kind of tired of just like working and just like these logistical, administrative type jobs, and I wanted to do something more creative. So I took the jump and started grad school kind of late in my life. I'm 35. And around 2020, when the pandemic hit, being a music producer and when the clubs are all closed because of the pandemic, I didn't really feel super like motivated or incentivized to like make music. And I discovered TouchDesigner and kind of from there became obsessed with it. And so ever since then, I've been making these sort of audio-visual installations to kind of bridge the gap between, my love for music and love for just visuals and lights and art. And so some of the things I primarily focus on are like audio reactive installations, ones in which I'm creating audio for my installation. And so I'm just going to give a quick, brief rundown of several things I've done. These are all very short videos. This is an instrument I made last year called the pitch rail. And in this instrument, the instrument itself is not made with TouchDesigner, but I'm using the visuals, getting the MIDI from Ableton as I'm playing it to kind of just showcase to the audience like what is being played. This is like an abstract representation of the 12 notes of a chromatic scale. And so as I'm playing it, you're kind of imagining this kind of piano in midair being played. Next, I have an installation called Sonoluminescence, which it visualizes the notes you're playing. So someone is playing notes on a keyboard, and these kind of vertical beams of light are displaying those same notes, much in the same fashion as the last thing, but this kind of brings it more to a concrete reality, having these lights right in front of you. I also really like sending MIDI from TouchDesigner. And so some things I do are creating these sort of interfaces in midair for making your own sort of. Could you make a piano where you can place the notes anywhere you want? So this is an example of that. Not played very well, but you get the gist. And so in this case, I can also make a chord in midair. All right, so you get the point. I love MediaPipe. Thank you, Torn and Dom, for changing my life. This next piece is one in which I took an image of my face and I wanted to sonify it, and so I basically created a system in which it takes the pixels of a grayscale image of my face and kind of plays it in real time in Ableton, so it looks like this. As you play with the kind of coloring of these pixels, it's obviously changing things like the velocity and the volume of it. So this is an abstract kind of weird thing. I make all these little ditties for Instagram that I really enjoy posting. I was inspired by another artist who I saw do this with a live video feed of them, and they were using Max for Live, which is honestly a bit beyond my comprehension. So using TouchDesigner to be how can I emulate this in a way that makes sense here was a very fun project. I also just aside from music stuff, just controlling lights in various ways. So this is a project in which you approach this kind of box, and as you would do a gesture, in this case a scream, it kind of creates this rage box sort of scenario. So these are very simple projects. I'm in grad school. We have a week to do this stuff. So obviously it's not these kind of 3-year-long insane TouchDesigner projects. So like I said, bear with me. This is a project in which I created this little game where you're a monkey kind of trying to get down to the ground. And this is a projection mapped image from TouchDesigner in conjunction with these LED bars. So that sort of interplay of the projection and the LEDs is fun. And lastly, this is like a MIDI reactive, oh, and it's freezing. Let's try this again. MIDI reactive projection mapping using one of my tracks. So, I get the stems from Ableton and have those influence different parameters of the projection mapping, right? So as the bass is sort of like wobbling, this kind of like green thing is kind of pulsing in and out. So I really like this kind of thing, especially with like live AV sets. When the music and the visuals are totally in sync, it creates a better experience, right? So having said all that, I want to get into my project called Hovercraft, which is this thing right here. And essentially what it is an interactive installation. Let's pause that. Where basically you can hover your hands over this, and it creates this lighting and these sounds. And the idea is that I want to democratize the music-making process. And so imagine if you're a 5-year-old child, right, and you see a grand piano in front of you. What's your first inclination? Probably to go like, ba 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 ba. And it's going to sound like crap, and you're going to be like, making music sucks, I hate this, I'm never learning piano, right? But if you gave a child an interface where no matter what they did, it sounded good, that just gives them that dopamine rush of like, okay, I enjoy the act of making music, and therefore I might struggle through the early parts of trying to learn this instrument, right? So I'm not going to play this video, I'm just going to give a quick live demo of what this is. And to help me with that, I will demonstrate here what is going on. So hopefully, I don't like do this in dark lighting conditions, so like let's see if this works. But you see my hands, right? Let's bring this over. Okay, so you see my hands. The tips of my index fingers are controlling this interface, and as long as they are within the boundaries of these white pucks, it plays sounds. So if I played, right? That's a standard sort of like minor scale played by a xylophone. I don't know if you can really see this in this video, but there are essentially things you can control here. So the instrument, it's a grand piano, a flute, strings, xylophone. Scales, so like major, minor, harmonic minor, and Phrygian, which is sort of like a more exotic scale. Is it playing a single note or a chord? Is it playing a single note or arpeggio? So let's say I want to play a arpeggio, right? I can hover my hand over this little icon. It'll flash, and now, right? I mean, there's nothing I can really do that's going to make it sound like out of key or bad because it's all locked to that scale. So let's try a different scenario, right? Let's try like an instant Beethoven sort of vibe. So I will change this to the strings, and I'll change to a different scale and to the chords. Something like that. So basically, like, I'm just totally freestyling here, and it sounds like I have actual music skill and experience. So that's the idea, right? Like, you can have no musical ability and come here and just kind of like mess around on it and be like, wow, this is great. I feel like very accomplished. And so moving back over here, I will explain this and kind of what's going into this and how TouchDesigner kind of helped me build this. So let's go back to the slideshow. And let's skip that. So yeah, there's these 4 different kind of controllable parameters: instrument, scale, chord, and arpeggio. And I didn't really want to overload the user with like different options because the more these kind of changeable things you can add, it just can be a bit much, right? So in this case, it's like you really have like 60 possible combinations, like 4 times 4 times 2 times 2. And I think it's like a good amount for a school project essentially. I mean, this is my thesis, but it's like I'm not selling this yet. I'd like to at some point if I get an investor. Anyone? But yeah, basically the way it works is that there's a standard, $20 Amazon webcam that's looking down and it's using MediaPipe to track my fingers. And so when it's doing that, it's doing 2 things simultaneously. It's sending MIDI data to Ableton Live to play the notes and also kind of change the various parameters that are happening, kind of turning on different effects or turning off different effects. And at the same time, it's sending a video to MadMapper, which is mapping it on all these LEDs. And I'll do a live kind of in TouchDesigner demo in a second, so bear with me. So basically, when I'm sending MIDI notes to Ableton, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but there's like a nice little component called TD Ableton where you can do things like write a single line of Python, and then when you do something, it sends a note, right? So in this case, this case, as you can see, like when I'm hovering my fingers over those things, it's sending different MIDI notes, and each one of these is a chop execute that's saying, op Ableton MIDI.send note, 62, which is the note C, I think, or maybe 64. And in addition to that, there's also these different lighting changes. So actually, I'm just going to do this in the software because I think it's a bit more engaging. So if we scroll down here, my network is not as organized as everyone else's because I have a chaotic brain, but let's take a look at this, right? So this sort of like very low resolution image is the current state of the instrument LED, right? So if okay, let's do this. If I walk over here and I hover over here, you can see that this is kind of changing, kind of like going through the motions of switching the instruments. And I do that for all of the parameters and then kind of compile it into one master shitty little low resolution picture, which it is sending to a MadMapper with a feature called Siphon, or Spout, I guess. And if you don't know what this is a sort of communication protocol that allows you to send video data between different softwares. So for example, if I look at MadMapper, this is the mapping for my 8x32 little LED panel that's kind of inside this. And come on, extend. So as I change things, all of these vertical, like the rows are the different kind of like rows of LEDs and the columns of LEDs. So as I change this, well, I hid this, which is important, but right. As you can see, it's kind of just making these like little changes that are kind of reflected on here. And in addition to that, there's this whole system of like, let me send, pulses of light as I play these notes. So I have this like arrangement here of different components of LEDs, one for each color, the colors of the rainbow because I am unimaginative. And they all go into this layout here. So as I play different notes, you're going to see different kind of like rows of colors happening. So right? And I wanted to make it so that the lights and the sound are kind of related in some ways. So for a single note, it's a full bar of light. If I change it to a chord, which is 3 notes on top of each other, I wanted to make it kind of representative of chords. That looks like this. Same thing for like an arpeggio, that's like 3 notes in a row. So to me, that looks a bit like this. Etc. So, when thinking about like building these sort of like physical installations, I want to think about like how can I make this the most engaging for an audience member and also the kind of most like dopamine stimulating and kind of like, okay, this all fits together in the same universe, which I really try to do here. What's next? Right. So then thinking about also like, whenever you see this media pipe stuff on Instagram, it's always someone in front of the computer going like this and like changing a little visual. That's really cool, but that's only that person interacting with it, right? With something like this, I have to consider that there are people that I don't know at all were using this, and like it might be installed somewhere where it's not very visible. In this case, I actually was in a great location right there at the end of the staircase, but it actually kind of blended in a bit with the kind of surroundings. So I made this pulsing sort of like idle state that basically says when someone hasn't touched this within 20 seconds, switch to this new light pattern, and the moment I touch it again, it goes off. And so in about I think the last time I set this timer, it was for 30 seconds. Yeah, in about 30 seconds, it's going to go back to that thing. So yeah, thinking about that, like how do you invite users to come and touch this, right? Because if it's all dark, no one's going to know that this is a thing you can interact with at all. But if it has that pulsing light, it's like, oh, it's this. I'm going to go investigate that. So that's like one kind of component that I thought of in terms of like how does this differentiate like standard sort of like interactive media art with things that people actually do interact with in real life. Secondarily, basically what's happening here is that as my fingers are hovering over these 3D objects, in TouchDesigner, 3D objects are in this kind of XYZ space. But when you're looking at a video, like a kind of 2D top, it's in the UV space. So I have to figure out a way of converting those 3D coordinates into UV coordinates. And so I basically had a system going where I did some mathematical calculations and was able to like actually map the UV boundaries of each one of those elements. And so I can move them around, and then no matter where I move them around, it's going to have the same effect. So it looks something like this. If you could like notice over here, the UV boundaries are moving as I move this 3D kind of like semicircle over. And that's really helpful because now when I guess there's no sound here, but as I'm playing those, it's still playing the same note, but can be in totally different positions. So that allows me to do a lot of user testing where I'm like making these circles bigger or smaller, like rearranging them. Originally it was in a circle, now it's in a semicircle. And it made it so that I didn't have to like manually be like, all right, what are the boundaries of this thing? Previously, my installation looked a lot different. It was this like giant 40-inch TV with this like big LED panel, and a lot of the graphics are more like 3D, so these spheres instead of these little pucks. So having that sort of like 3D to UV converter was super helpful in that case, because that way I could really play around with like, do I want a sphere? Do I want a cube? Do I want a so-and-so? And not having to like rethink how I'm positioning this stuff and how I'm going to interact with that. Secondly, so the way this is made is basically there's many layers of laser cut wood here. There's 6 of them, and at the very top there's a nice kind of like sleek black acrylic. And as I was cutting these, these layers sort of look like this. And if I open up Illustrator to illustrate this point, it looks like this, right? This is the top layer, this is the second layer. The pucks with the LEDs kind of fit in here. There's room here for different wirings and cables, which it looks kind of weird, but it allows for like me to have all these wires without it interfering with the actual build device, and then more, and then more, and then more, right? So if I ever wanted to see like, will this component fit inside here, what I would normally have to do is take all of these and just align them together. And if I look at this now, I can't see what the hell is going on here, like, especially if there's no colors. And then I'm like, okay, I have no idea like which case, in what orientation these things have to be. And like, there might be a scenario where I cut something and then actually like is overlapping with something else that I wasn't expecting. So what I did was I basically created this Tox where I could like import these files automatically. It would create a 3D geometry of it. It would extrude it to the right thickness. And then I could use MediaPipe to kind of play around and explode it in midair. So this is what I made. And it looks like this. And basically it allows me to like create this 3D model of this, which I've never seen in TouchDesigner, and I just don't know how to use Blender or like Fusion 360 or anything. So one day I woke up at 6 a.m., had to pee really bad, and I was like, I'm just gonna stay awake. And I just built this in like an hour, and I was like, oh, actually this is really helpful, because in that process of like exploding this out, I can identify certain kind of pain points in my project. So this is like a way I thought of like, how do you use TouchDesigner for these like unconventional ways where it can help you with things that's not really meant to do. I mean, if anyone else does stuff like this, I would love to know, because I would love to know some efficiencies there. And I had the project open, but then in the process of moving all this stuff, some cables got knocked out, and I had to like quit TouchDesigner and stuff. So I'll open it at the end if I have time. Actually, I have no idea how much time I have left. Okay, like 5 minutes. But essentially what it is a series of replicated components that get their name and also the contents from this like file folder. So what happens is that if I save one of these files as like left 1, it knows to basically put that 3D geometry on the top level, extrude it 0.25 inches, put it on the left versus the right, obviously. If I do left 2, it makes it automatically under it. So then in that case, when I have all these ready, if I want to make any change, I just go to Illustrator, export left 1, replace the file, and it just automatically changes to that version. So it's not like I'm manually kind of like re-uploading files, which is quite nice. Yeah, I mean, like I took a few screenshots here just in case it didn't work, which is the case. But basically, inside of each of these components is a geometry that has its value on the z-axis kind of like automatically offset by whatever number its name is, which is the file name. So it creates this system in which, as long as I name the files correctly, then it just makes it automatically, which is very convenient. And I also did this depth calculator, which I feel like an idiot because I just realized this is actually a feature that you can do in MediaPipe. But I had this stroke of genius where I was like, all right, I want to be able to do this thing where like I do, height mapping on this, right? Where if I'm like lower might be a higher volume, higher might be a lower volume. And so I spent some time looking into these like math equations that I guess is already incorporated in this with the hand distance thing. I just didn't see that, so I tried to make it myself, which I did, which is great. But the problem here is that as you get closer, farther from the camera, it works in the exact center. But if you're on the edges here, I am going just straight forward towards the camera, and it appears to the camera that my hand is kind of going off to the side. So what ended up happening when I was testing this is that, like as I'm going up, it kind of like actually leaves the boundary of the circle and therefore it doesn't play the note. So I kind of gave up on that, but I just like this depth calculator anyway. I'm sure that the version that's natively built into MediaPipe is probably better, but so be it. It's just, one of those things where it's like, do you have a problem? There's probably some way to fix it, or not fix it, to like solve that in TouchDesigner. And if you can figure it out, then, great, love that. And just to finish off here, one funny thing I discovered was that as I had this sort of like TV version of the installation, which I showed at my school's winter show, the camera is facing down, and it doesn't really matter what is on there. What the kind of UI on the screen helps in the sense that like you can tell where to put your fingers, but you really don't need that. And as I was testing this, I just kind of put on a random YouTube video of this guy doing like ASMR hypnosis with his hands, and it was actually tracking that. And so in MediaPipe, it's like looking at his hands, and he's accidentally triggering these things. So it's kind of like you can use these videos as like sort of like, free generative art, like just get any videos of hands over this, and then you're just kind of randomly touching stuff, and it's like, oh, cool, I didn't know that could work like that. But yeah, that is essentially my talk, and I'm going to open it up to questions, but also just leave this here because, listen, I need a job after I graduate, and if anyone is interested or thinks I'm smart, please contact me on any one of these very convenient QR codes you can scan, and it goes to these things. So on that note, I'm going to leave this here, but are there any questions about this interface or my practice or anything like that? And I can't really see, so if you are raising your hand, just yell it out. No. Listen, I mean, it's really more like a toy than a legitimate musical instrument. I'm going to be totally real with you. There's only so much you can do with it. You can make a 1-minute piece that sounds great, but like any more than that, you have to like change instruments, and there's a kind of like a silence. I would like to fix that at some point, and I had this whole grand vision of like, all right, you can hit record and then record your thing, and it's going to email you this file and all that jazz. But then it just became too much of a chaotic process, and I wanted to focus more on the kind of like nice fabrication of it. So the answer is no. Not yet. Yeah, there we go. I did not. I did a 1-credit weekend course on motion graphics, which is where I built these things as part of a homework assignment. But basically, yeah, like you'll kind of notice if I turn off, where is the layout here? Let me just exit this. So you'll kind of notice on the left here, like the arpeggio and the chord mode. If I hit those, it kind of does a nice little animation. So behold. I am not a designer or animator, so this actually took a long time to make. And if anyone wants to help out with like doing that for me in some capacity, I will pay you money to do that. Okay. If there are no more questions, then thank you very much, and enjoy the next step.